Hello and welcome to the editorial analysis of The Hindu. Today we shall be discussing the editorial of the 25th of April. So coming to the first article, Beyond the Free Trade Idealism. This is a very important article, primarily because this is discussing an economic idea, economic ideology and economic concept. So that is the relevance of this particular article. Now coming to the context. The context here is an analysis of the free trade policy, and this is primarily in the backdrop of the challenges or the criticism that India is facing from US, where US is insinuating towards India, or it is pressurizing India to ensure more free trade, to open up India's barriers, to lower India's import duties. So this is the pressure that is coming on India. So this policy of free trade is what has been analyzed in this article. Despite the fact that the context is US related, it is not country specific analysis, rather an overall discussion on the validity of this policy, the free trade economic policy. Now coming to the first issue that has been discussed in the editorial is an ideal scenario. Now this free trade policy in an ideal scenario has to work in a certain way. According to this particular policy, what is envisaged is that every single person in the world is going to do one job that person does the best. For example, a person is best at creating cycles, or for that matter, another person is very good at making cakes. So only few people who are good at this job are going to do this particular job, and they're going to do it very efficiently. And then these are the only people who are going to sell cycles to the entire global population. And as a result of which, what is going to happen in the world is that efficient production is what is going to happen, and the consumers are going to get the best products possible. So this is what is the idea of a free trade policy. This is the ideal scenario of free trade policy. But does this really happen? The reality is that this is what does not happen. People in the entire world are performing multiple jobs, and often it also happens that it is not that every single person is an expert in that particular job. For that matter, efficiency to the fullest is what is not coming out. Another issue is that if this is the model that is to be followed, then no person should start a new business. For instance, a person wants to start the manufacturing of cycles in some other country, for instance. For example, US is best at manufacturing of cycles, and suddenly somebody in India also wants to start manufacturing cycles. Then obviously at the initial stages, that person will not be able to manufacture cycles as efficiently as US is doing. So according to this ideal scenario of free trade policy, that person or that particular country should never manufacture cycles. So is this what this ideal scenario, is this somehow achievable? It is not achievable. So that is one thing that has been discussed in this editorial, that the free trade policy and the ideal scenario of free trade policy is what is a hoax, and it is something that is not achievable. Next is the issue of consumer welfare. Now here the editorial discusses that yes, definitely free trade is what is always in the interest of the consumer. This is primarily because competition is what is raised. For example, cold drinks in India, if you remember, as children you must, I'm sure majority of you might have a memory of having cold drinks as children. They were largely known as Campa Cola, and these kind of brands were what were there in the market. After the advent of foreign brands like Coca-Cola and Pepsi, these Indian brands have been removed from the market altogether because they couldn't stand the competition that was coming from international players, and the consumers were largely benefited in terms of electronics, in terms of food products. They got a better quality product for their money. So definitely this was in the interest of the consumer. So consumer welfare is what is justified as a reason for propagating free trade. Another issue that you should know here is with regards to the developing countries. Now all of this will actually make sense by the end of the discussion. You will understand that why all of these individual discussions are what have been made in the editorial. You will get the complete picture a little later. Coming to the concept of developing countries, now here the editorial is discussing that for developing countries to come up with efficiency, which is the bedrock of free trade policy, what is important is that there is a requirement of infrastructure, there is a requirement of investment in these countries. But what happens is that because of the historical reasons, because of colonialism that was present in the past, what has happened is that developing countries are lacking resources, and they do not have adequate infrastructure, nor do they have adequate investment. So in this scenario, when will that day come that developing countries will have money sufficient enough to match the efficiency of the foreign companies? So this is one question that needs to be answered. And if in lack of the infrastructure and investment, they are unable to match the efficiency, then in such a scenario, what is going to happen is, like for instance, in the above case, if India does not have the infrastructure to manufacture cycles, then only US will manufacture cycles for entire eternity, and India can never manufacture cycles. So this is what is a vicious circle that is being built around free trade policy. Next is the issue of job growth. Now here you need to understand that jobs are what are vital for the growth of a country, and also income is what is going to be needed to take the benefit under consumer welfare. So now you have to understand the circle that is being built. Now for consumer welfare, it has been envisaged that free trade policy is what is required. That means manufacturing should be in selective countries only. Definitely, if we take the case of India, India is maybe not an expert in developing or in manufacturing sector, and India should, under the free trade policy, allow for foreign goods to come into India's borders. This is in the interest of consumer welfare. But how can this welfare be ensured if the consumer has no income? You have to understand this concept. This is something that is very, very important. For the consumer to have generated income, the consumer needs to work. Jobs need to be created in the country, and jobs will only be created if manufacturing is what is developed in the country. And for manufacturing to then develop in the country, an industrial policy is what has to be advocated. And if industries are to be set up in a developing country, some degree of protection to these industries in the initial years is what is mandated, which goes against the concept of free trade. So this is the entire vicious circle which has set in, and as a result of which the growth in the country is not happening adequately. The manufacturing sector in India is what is not growing, and this brings us to the next point. That is an analysis of India's manufacturing sector, which is continuously weakening. This is one of the major problems and major challenges of the economy. In the present scenario in India, what is happening is that this consumer welfare is definitely being achieved, but this is what is happening from the service sector. All those part of the population that is employed as in the service sector is definitely reaping the benefits. But what about those who are not in the service sector? What about those who are unemployed? And for that matter, what about those who are vulnerable and weak? For example, the farmers of our country. They are unable to reap the benefits of this free trade policy, primarily because they do not have income enough to buy these competitive products that are coming. So what is important is that income be provided to these people also, so that they can also take the benefit of free trade. But for this income, precisely free trade is what is an enemy here. So that is one analysis which has been drawn in this particular editorial. Next is discussion on the case of China. Now the editorial is mentioning that by 1990s, approximately India and China were parallel to each other. But after 1990, what has happened is, till 2019, China has far outgrown India's capabilities or India's economic might. For example, the capital goods production sector in China is what is 50 times greater than India. So why is this happening is because China at that point of time followed some policies which were protective towards industrial development. China focused on developing its own manufacturing sector, which India has clearly missed out, because after the 1990 reforms, India opened up its markets for free trade policy. And definitely it has had its benefits, but the negative has been that India's manufacturing sector has not developed. Next, something that has been discussed is the concept of employment elasticity, and this is a key word. Whenever you have to show that employment is not being generated in India, please try and use these words. They give a good impression. They show that you have some technical knowledge. Now, employment elasticity, for those of you who do not know, simply means that what are the number of jobs that are created per unit increase in GDP. And despite the fact that India is one of the fastest growing countries which has a very, very high GDP, India is one country which has one of the lowest employment elasticity. That means for every per unit increase in GDP, the jobs that are being created are minimal, and that is one of the biggest pressing concerns for the country today. Next is the concept of the universal basic income, which I have discussed in several articles previously also. Here you need to understand that this is what is a knee-jerk reaction by the political parties during election times. They all know that the major problem is of unemployment, that the youth is not having enough income. Even if jobs are being created, these jobs are not sustainable jobs, they are not in the organized sector, and they are not enough to cater to the demands of a particular citizen. As a result of which, what the government is doing is it is promising, or the parties are promising, that they will give a universal basic income, but definitely, as we have discussed, that this is a short-term solution and can never be a real solution for doing away with the problem of unemployment, which is something that needs to be addressed, and this is what can be addressed by the concept of universal basic services, which I have discussed previously. Please go and watch those videos also. Next, you should know about the concept of billion plus citizen economy. Now, India is a billion plus citizen economy. There is no secret about it. And this is what is India's biggest strength, primarily because if India is what is a billion plus citizen economy, then this is the economy which has the largest market that is available to it. And in such a scenario, what should happen is that this market can buy products, and this market can be a self-sustaining market for itself. If India develops industries, India develops enterprises, then definitely these products are what can be sold in the economy. And this is one benefit to India, which India is not at present reaping. The billion plus citizen economy is what is being taken benefit of by foreign companies, is what has been discussed here. Next, the editorial is talking about some potential sectors where growth in manufacturing, or for that matter jobs, is what can be created. The first sector here is the tourism and the hospitality sector. Next is what has been spoken about, the automobile sector and electronic sector, where manufacturing capabilities is what India can develop to ensure jobs for the citizens. Next, what has been discussed is the WTO, which at present the editorial says is largely in the intensive care unit, primarily because it is something that has been overlooked by all the major countries and major economies. The WTO needs to be strengthened back. India has held its belief, its faith in the WTO, but what is required is that it is overhauled so that nobody feels cheated under the WTO regime, and the interests of all the countries and the welfare of all the people of this world are what are considered under the WTO. So that is one analysis which has been given. And next is a keyword again. Here the editorial is discussing that for the government, the coming government that is going to come in power, the major policy for that government should be income and employment policy, because this is what is the most pertinent problem for India. So this is what is the entire analysis of this particular article. Indeed, very, very important article. A question can come in General Studies Paper 3 as part of economics. Otherwise, also for your general understanding of world economy, this is a wonderful article. So that is the relevance. Coming to the next article, just recompense. Now, the context here is that of the Bilkis Bano case. Now, here you should know that this is a case of a female, Bilkis Yaqub Rasool Banu. She was a gang rape survivor of the 2002 communal riots in Gujarat. Now, her case is what has been settled by the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court has asked that a compensation of 50 lakh rupees is what the state government of Gujarat should give to Bilkis Bano. So, in this particular case, it's a major social issue. So, some issues become important here. The first is the issue of compensation as a component of criminal justice. Now here the editorial is saying that definitely it is a state obligation to give the victim of crime some degree of compensation, but this is one component of criminal justice which is not very much focused upon in India, and indeed from this particular case a precedence is what should be set where victims of extreme degree of crime should be given some degree of compensation by the state. Here you need to understand one concept. Even if the crime against a victim is what is done by another person, the state is also responsible. Because clearly if crime is what is taking place in the society, then the state has largely failed the citizen in providing protection. For example, in the Nirbhaya case, definitely the gang rape was what was done by individuals, but isn't it a state failure also, because this bus in which Nirbhaya case was done was moving around on the roads and nobody could spot it. There were no lights that were available, there was no security that was available. So in that case, the responsibility of state is what cannot be shied away from, and as a result of which the state should be mandated to provide some compensation to people who have faced heinous crimes. So this is one important analysis. Next issue is that of mob violence and public lynching. Now this is something that these kind of crimes are what are very, very high, specifically in case of India. They are also on a rise. So whenever such kind of crimes are what take place, it becomes difficult to actually take hold of the culprit or to identify the culprit. So in such cases also the justice should be ensured, and this is what can be ensured through compensation is what has been discussed. Next, what you should know here is that the idea of compensation is what is legal. This is what is mentioned in section 357A of the CRPC, and this was through an amendment that was brought about in the year 2008. So this is the legal backing. Under this particular amendment, it was mandated that a fund is what is to be created in every single state for paying compensation to victims. Also, a similar fund is there, which is known as the Central Victim Compensation Fund at the center level. There are other schemes of the government which envisage to provide some compensation to victims. But the issue in India is that these schemes are what are dispersed. So the editorial is advocating for streamlining of all of these schemes so that adequate compensation is what is given to victims. So that is what is the entire analysis here. The editorial is primarily important as a piece of an example which you can use as a social in your social issues, or for that matter even in ethics paper. The term that has been used here is restitutive justice. India's model of justice is not of retribution but rather of rehabilitation. So rehabilitation is what should not happen of the criminal but also of the victim is what has been analyzed here. So this is going to be an important piece of example which you should remember. Coming to the next article, taking advantage of the Belt and Road Initiative. Now the context here is that the Belt and Road Initiative Forum is what is to be held on the 25th of April, that is from today. But India has not agreed to participate in the Belt and Road Initiative Forum that is being conducted in Beijing. So the editorial is advocating that India should have been a part of this Belt and Road Initiative Forum. Now in the past I have discussed, if you are following my videos, then you must remember that I have discussed umpteen number of articles on Belt and Road Initiative, and one commonality amongst all the opinions has been that India should adhere or should become a part of the Belt and Road Initiative. So if ever you have an opportunity to argue or debate or give an opinion on this issue, I would suggest that you should give an opinion in the favor of India joining the Belt and Road Initiative. Obviously there is an analysis that is there. There are concerns that India is not joining the Belt and Road Initiative, but the larger expert opinion is that India should be a part of it. So that is one thing I wanted to stress upon. Now coming to the issues which are important, the first issue is that of Asia as the center of the world. Now the editorial says that this is what is the motto of the 21st century. So in this context, if Asia is what is to be the center of the world, and BRI, the Belt and Road Initiative, is going to be one channel of ensuring that Asia is the center of the world, then in that context India should have been a part of this forum, primarily because it is Asia that is the center of the world and India is very much an important country of Asia. It is not China as the center of the world. So why India should step or remain behind is what has been discussed. Also, the editorial is giving us a fact. It is saying that by the year 2030, the world economy or the middle class consumption is what is going to rise to the tune of $30 trillion. And of this $30 trillion, only $1 trillion is what is going to be consumed by the Western world. The rest $29 trillion economy is what is of consumption economy is what is going to be generated largely in Asia. So in that context also, Asia is what is the center of the world. Next is the issue of the working population in India. Now here the editorial is discussing that in the coming time, approximately 200 million youth is what is going to be working in India. So of this $29 trillion that is going to be shifted towards Asia, a large part is what is going to be consumed by the youth in India. So India is going to be a major economy in the future. It is going to have a major market. In that context, India's role in Asia's development as well as in the Belt Road Initiative is what is important, and so India should have been a part of the Belt Road Initiative. Next, what you need to know here is that this is what is called as an end of the old order. It is a political end of the old order. This is primarily in the backdrop of Italy as well as Britain joining the Belt and Road Initiative. This is something that is important. Italy, as a first member of the G7, has joined the Belt and Road Initiative, and Britain has joined the Belt and Road Initiative, a bank here. So that is why both these countries have gone against US in joining China's efforts of Belt and Road Initiative, and that is why this is what is an end to the old order, and India should have been party to it. Next is the issue of infrastructure development. Now here the editorial is discussing that infrastructure development is what is the prime need for Asia, and this is something that even India cannot deny. And what the Belt and Road Initiative is doing is that it is providing just what is required to Asia, and India is also in need of infrastructure. So why is it that India is not participating in the Belt and Road Initiative? Rather, it should actively engage with China here. Also, next is the issue of multilateralism. Now, India has criticized the Belt and Road Initiative, and India has said that this is what is largely opaque and it is what is led by one single country only. But the editorial is saying that this is a false criticism. Rather, the Belt and Road Initiative is now moving towards multilateralism because it is focusing on the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. There are many countries that are involved in this. Also, the IMF is partnering with the Belt and Road Initiative. So this is a multilateral platform now, and calling it led by a single country is not justified. Next is the issue of strategic objective. Now here the editorial is saying that India is concerned about the fact that under the Belt and Road Initiative disguise, China has some strategic objectives. Now the editorial is discussing that definitely this is true, but this has been something that is a historic concept. This is nothing new. For example, even if we discuss the 1950s Marshall Plan by US, that was also a strategic objective. In the aftermath of the Cold War, during the Cold War era also, there was an alignment that took place where some countries were part of the US pole and the other countries were the part of USSR pole. So this kind of strategic objective has always been there. So why single out China here, and why be against China if it also has some strategic objectives? Next is the issue of China-India cooperation. Now the editorial is bringing out this issue that rather than being against each other, if China and India are cooperating, then this is what is going to enable them to collectively reform the global governance, which is in the interest of both India as well as China. And for this reason, primarily, India should join the Belt and Road Initiative with China. So that is what has been discussed. And next, what has been discussed here is the concept of, or the issue of CPEC, which is the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. This is the biggest irritant because of which India is not joining the Belt and Road Initiative. This is primarily because the CPEC is what is running through the Pakistan-occupied Kashmir, and this is what is a critical concern for India. For this, the editorial is advocating that India should raise its concern and India should prove that largely the Pakistan-occupied Kashmir is what is under India's territorial boundaries, or rather it is India's sovereignty. That should be there in the POK. Also, the second analysis which has been given vis-a-vis this issue of CPEC is what is important for us, because the editorial is saying that India should give the Belt and Road Initiative a South Asian character. And if this is what is done, then India will not have a problem with the CPEC, because this should not be considered as a China-Pakistan project, but rather a project of the South Asia and South Asian countries. So in that context, India should not have a problem with the Belt and Road Initiative passing through the Pakistan-occupied Kashmir. So this is what India needs to contribute towards the Belt and Road Initiative, and indeed India should be a part of the Belt and Road Initiative is what has been discussed here. This is somehow very, very important. India-China relations are what are very, very important, and also CPEC is what is important. Belt and Road Initiative is a very, very important topic, so you should be well prepared in that context, and these points will aid you in that. So that is the relevance of this particular article, and that's about our discussion today. I thank you all for watching the video.